Welcome to this episode of The Self-Led Leader. In this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Ramon Ghosh, performance coach, all around the topic of how to identify and prevent your midlife crisis. More specifically, how to recognize the signs and how to come up with the right strategic tools to avoid anything related to a midlife crisis and instead turn it into an opportunity, a wonderful transformation that just has tremendous positive ripple effects throughout your life. We all have times in our lives where we experience hardship, misalignment, feeling like the life we are living is not the life we're supposed to be living. So if you relate to that, if you're having any of those feelings whatsoever, this episode is the perfect one for you. Let's get right into it. Welcome to The Self-Led Leader, a podcast for high performers who want to lead from alignment, not expectation. I'm Dr. Christina Ady, a social psychologist, and I'm here to help you lead with clarity, not chaos. This show is about what happens before the strategy, your mindset, your nervous system, the inner leadership that shapes everything you say and do. Because presence isn't about being loud, it's about being aligned. Let's get right into it. Welcome to The Self-Led Leader. Today I'm so excited to have Ramon on the episode. And why don't we start with the most basic, most popular question of who is Ramon? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Christina. So I'm a performance coach. What does that mean? I help people in the corporate world, typically business leaders, founders, CEOs, and essentially they would have got to a crossroads in their life. In some respect, it might be their career, it might be a relationship, it might be a midlife, and they just want to change something. And I work with them on a coaching program to facilitate that change and to elevate them. You know, the words I use are to reboot their life, to make them bulletproof, to make them feel excited and energized by waking up every day. So that's the work I do.
Nice. That sounds like a beautiful journey that you take them on. What would you say lights you up right now about the type of work that you do?
You know, I think seeing the transformation in people. I think firstly, if you look at like the genesis of when people come to me, they have typically already been on some journey or tried to change something in terms of like habits, systems, and they come to me and they just want. They know they're not going to get different results by doing the same things. So when we work together, we go through a process, and it just lights me up to see them turning up. It's a 3-month program, like week by week, and you can just see them lift, like the energy raise, and the tangible difference in terms of what they talk about with their impacts, you know, on family, on kids, in work, and that lights me up just to see that transformation. And what really works for me is just to think about the ripple effects, right?
Mm.
So if like one person shows up better, like dad shows up better, you know, his partner benefits, the kids benefit, his neighbors benefit, work benefits, and that for me is part of my purpose and my why.
Yeah, I love that. I think most people overlook that ripple effect and they think that personal transformation primarily impacts them. And when it's hard and it's difficult and you lose that motivation, I think it's so important to remind people that the ripple effect is very, very real.
Mm,
And I love what you said. I'm going to back up for a second here. The midlife crisis that seems to have such a cliche around it, and all the movies and there's people paint a picture of the midlife crisis being this like really intense negative thing. And it's almost not surprising to me because when you consider it, all of us are practically still babies, just out of high school, asked to make major life decisions about the remainder of our lives before we've even had a chance to live life and find ourselves and
mm.
discover what we like and what we don't like. And so I think maybe, if you can agree with this, maybe rather than calling it a midlife crisis, we should all start switching the narrative and calling it something else, like a midlife reinvention or a midlife recalibration based on this new version of yourself that has life experience and can make better decisions. So I'd love to hear about what your journey was like and if you've had any of these kind of midlife crises and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, look, I love the sound of that, and I was just trying to think about how to define it myself. Would it
Mm.
be midlife reboot, a midlife crossroads, whatever that is. And it's cool what you mentioned, because you're right. We have to make all these adult decisions. Let's just say in the UK, it's like 18, 19. Our brains don't fully develop really until our mid-20s, right? And we're already then, like, running full pace, trying to get the material, the titles, possessions. And then, of course, there's that arc of life as we come into middle age, where we have the ability to make decisions. And that's the great thing about midlife. I think a lot of people can sometimes get stuck just actually listening to a repetitive narrative, which is, I should be feeling more tired. I should be feeling more energized. This is just life. I need to struggle on, and sacrifice comes into it. It doesn't need to be that way. And people will also think when they come to that crossroads, okay, I need to make a massive change, a big leap. You don't. You can make some really small changes, which will be really powerful and impactful. About 7 years ago, um, a good friend became a transformation coach, a life coach. He was a marketing executive, and his name's Greg. And I was one of his first clients. And at that point in my corporate life, I was successful, but I wanted to be like, an industry head, a team head, a practice head. I was very, very comfortable being a deputy and a number two, but there was something around not maybe stepping into a leadership role. And there was something that was just holding me back. I didn't know what it was. And I worked with Greg, and I'm always looking. I mean, you can see behind me, there's lots of books. I'm always looking to learn and grow and evolve. And I went on a kind of program with Greg, and it unpicks all of the limiting beliefs, patterns, emotions, influences that I picked up, which we often picked up during childhood. So it's interesting that you say we make decisions when we're children. A lot of our childhood programs can still exist as adults, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're not self-serving. You can find them from like negative emotional triggers. Okay, do you get angry? Do you get fearful? Like we all do in modern society, but are there patterns around what you get angry or fearful over? And how can that relate back to an experience, to a parent, to a relationship, to an event? So we worked through that whole process, and for me, it was hugely transformational. It was literally like, you know night and day, and like waking up and being like, okay, there's clarity, there's energy, there's more time. And that's essentially what I do with my clients now. I trained to do what Greg has done and what he still does. And I've added different modalities on every year. And it's what happens with this is you end up working, I mean, it's a cliche, you end up working smarter, not harder, because everything that you're doing is congruent to your values and how you want to show up in the world and operate.
I love that. Okay, I'm going to unpack all of that a little bit more. I think one of the best ways I can illustrate this for people is like, if you've ever been told, like, you're just like your mother, you're just like your father, like if a partner has ever said that to you, for most of us, it's so extremely triggering and be like, how dare you? How dare you? No, I am not. But it is so true because our parents are like the biggest source of influence for us. And we pick up all their habits, all their behaviors, all their ways of thinking without realizing while we're kids. And I know they say it's until the age of 7, I believe, that our minds are pretty much all in not beta, delta, one of the other lower brainwaves. And so until the age of 7, you're literally like a walking sponge of your subconscious mind, and
Yeah.
everything just gets absorbed. And it's like, that is what it is. And we don't stop to ever reflect on that. And that's why you hear people who are like, well, that's just how I am. That's just how things are done in my family. Like if you ever get with a partner or a team and there's a disagreement, one person may blow up every single time. Well, my family just yells. That's how we solve conflicts. While the other person might shut down and not talk to you for 4 days because that's what their family does and they avoid it. And it's crazy because we don't stop to really contemplate this and like have it click for ourselves that just because it's the way it's done does not mean it's the way it should be done or the way we have to continue doing it. And so, to your point, unpacking all that and doing it in a new way that's in alignment with how you'd actually like to do things or what feels natural to you. There is so much freedom and liberation in that. So that's the first thing that just so near and dear to my heart because when I was in grad school, learning about all of this and like doing research on how like something simple like stereotypes gets passed on in families,
Yeah.
like it's insane how much stuff gets passed on to us without us realizing, like
Mm.
every day, especially as kids. So that's I'll leave that there. That's something we can unpack more if you want to. But
I
yeah.
think that's so true. And look, I just think in I mean, going a little bit esoteric here. If you
Yeah.
think about, there's lots of studies saying that generational trauma can be passed down through your DNA,
Mm,
right? And it's to your point around, people operating the same as their mum or their dad, and like that's all well and good because like you'll have unconditional love for our parents, right? But it doesn't mean to say that how I show up today in 2025 is going to be useful using the same traits that my dad had in like 1975. So that there is an evolution point there, and one around just continuing to grow and heal, right?
mm.
Which is a lot of what the work is about.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think there's layers and layers and layers and patterns. And so there's similar aspects of this in my work as well, but it's like thinking about what's that first generational pattern that comes up. And then there's
Mm.
always something under the surface, and then something under the surface. And so it takes some time and some effort, but it's so worth doing because it's so liberating to your point. And it is like, it gives you such a fresh perspective on life. And it's like, I love the point that you said where you don't have to make these massive life transformations. It could just be little things that you tweak to optimize your perspective, your belief systems, your behaviors. And then all of a sudden you're living a completely different life in the same life that you were living. Like it's incredible the way that that can work. So, um,
Exactly, and look, I think again, it's moving against the stereotype of a midlife crisis, right?
Mm,
People think that during a midlife crisis, you've got to make massive changes, right? You've got to start a new relationship. You've got to go out and buy a brand new red Ferrari. Like it doesn't it doesn't have to be that at all. The subtle
yeah.
shifts, as long as you do them, well and consistently, can be so powerful.
Well, that's just it. I think that's the difference. Like for me, a midlife crisis is an over accumulation of these feelings of knowing that you're not living the way you're supposed to. Something
Yeah,
about your life is not right. It's been bothering you, it's been nagging you, it's been building up. And then it's that crossroads moment where either I'm going to do the exact same thing that I've been taught to do, that I've been trained to do, that I want to do, like buy that red Ferrari that's going to be a little bit meaningless months from now, or do the inner work that actually gets me to a place of like, I can breathe and I can understand my feelings and I can get rid of them rather than trying to stuff them down with purchases or food, something else. So, so from your experience, when you work with clients and they're at that crossroads moment, what are people typically experiencing in that moment? And like, what do you think pushes them going the transformation way versus the crisis way?
it's a great question. So look, they want to make change clearly because they don't want to stay stuck.
Mm,
They're like, I don't want to be here in 3 to 5 years' time doing the same stuff. So I need to try something different. And it's interesting. People will try the crisis way, which might be a purchase,
yeah.
right? Because that is something different, right? And that's fine. The way that I would like articulate this is actually looking at the different types of happiness, right? So
Mm,
there is pleasure, which can be buying a new car, could be going to have a coffee, it could be drinking alcohol, but it's going to give you that dopamine hit, but it's not going to last for a long time, right? So there's pleasure, the satisfaction, which is can a lot of the time be retrospective. It's great, just I've got a great garden. I've worked on that for the last 6 months, and it looks brilliant. I can be very happy with that, or happy with the promotion I've just got. But sitting above that really is joy, right? And that's
mm,
just what is with us all the time. That's the fundamental programming piece that we have within our mind, our body, and our soul. A lot within our subconscious, which you've touched on. And you know, people reach out to me and want to do this transformation work because they want to rewire how they operate. They
yeah.
know that there's something better. And to your point, there might have been unbridled joy, let's just say as a 10-year-old, and then we put layers over that, responsibilities, pressure, exams, the material. And what we want to do is like remove all of those layers, to your point, layers of an onion, you know, filters on glasses, however you want to say it, and just unearth that joy again, which is there. You just need to dig beneath and find it again.
Yeah, and that is really, really hard. And I can speak from personal experience that it's extremely hard. For me, I began working under the table on the weekends when I was like 10, I want to say around like 10. And then I would have consistent under the table jobs until I was like 16. And then I worked consistently my whole life. Right. And there was a part of me recently that was, getting esoteric here a little bit more, but it's like, okay, inner child healing and finding joy in the things that I'm doing, even if it is a chore or a responsibility. And that concept was so, so hard to me. And I went down the rabbit hole on YouTube and on podcasts and on videos. And I'm like, but how? It doesn't make sense to me. How do you find the joy when there's so much to do and I have to do this and this and this and this and I've got my house to clean and my business to run and it's a concept that I'd love for you to unpack a little bit more because for so many of us that have been conditioned for like hustle culture and work and who have had joy a little prematurely taken away through layers of experience and responsibility, like how do you even start to unpack that and find your joy again?
It's a great question. It's a deep one. They're ones that I like. So I'm gonna do my best to simplify this, and this is how I work with clients. Actually, we do a 3-step process, and it's one that I've been through myself, and I know it works. It's transformative, and it's quite simply the past, the present, and the future. So we unpick the past. We look at those limiting influences, beliefs. We look at things that might not serve you, that might have been sent down with unconditional love from your parents at a time that is now outdated and not fit for purpose. There might have been an event, something that's happened that stuck with you for whatever reason. Um, you know, I, I, I do a lot of athletics, right? So I'm a welfare officer for my running club, and one of the interesting things is when you're coaching people in a sports environment, you've got to be so careful because one thing that you say can stick with a person, especially if their brain is still developing. So we look at the past and we unpick that, and then we assess the present. So how are you using your energy? How is that across the pillars of mental, physical, and emotional wellness? Um, you'll know this, but you're typically only as strong as your weakest pillar. So if there's something you're neglecting, you're going to need to double down on that. Otherwise, everything else is gonna be more difficult. And once you have those building blocks in place, you can really think about, well, what do I want? What are the priorities? What is my vision? And how do I create that? But it's not easy work. What we're talking about is getting a default mode setting of joy, right? And you don't just press one switch and it's joy forever. It's an ongoing work of art, if you like. And then you can bring in habits and systems.
Mm.
So things like diet, being hydrated, morning rituals, sunshine, looking at circadian rhythm. Before this conversation with you, I lay down and did like 15 minutes of breath work. It's like, right, I want to alkalize my body. I want to get, switched on. I want to just be very clear for this conversation. So it's using those techniques to make sure that because in modern life, where got so many notifications, responsibilities, busyness. We need to have those techniques to fall back on to get back to the mode of joy.
I like how you said that. It's not a default mode that stays on. I think for most of us these days, the default mode is like stress or overwhelm or burnout. That's what I see a lot of. It's what I experience a lot of myself. And we were talking about this the other day. I think about the concept of glimmers and like when you
Mm.
experience something like joy, even for a few moments, um, it's easy on the one hand to sort of overlook it and be like, "Oh, that was so fleeting. Like it didn't work because it was temporary." But if you can switch your perspective on that and be like, "Look, I did it. I can do it again longer." And like keep trying and keep trying. And it's I love the concept of like a mental gym and all skills essentially being the same as training physically. And it's the same thing. It's like put in the reps, put in the reps. up the weight and put in more reps, and eventually you'll get there. And so, when you're working with clients or to anyone listening, what are the signs that someone should look out for that they're in that state of like, I'm about to hit my breaking point. I'm about to be in the crisis slash I'm ready for transformation.
Yeah, tired all the time,
Mm,
um, self-medicating with caffeine, alcohol, poor diet, getting emotionally triggered easily, in work, with a partner, with kids. Anger and fear are quite big. Um, just feeling that they don't have clarity, they're overthinking, they're either stuck in the past or the future, and they're not available in the present, and therefore not connected. Um, and just that they, don't feel their true core selves. Like, if we ask ourselves that honest question by ourselves, am I being me? Like, we all know what the answer is, whether it's a yes or a no, right? And quite often people have either conformed to expectations of others, they've gone down the road of validation, external validation, and they just need to come back to themselves. So, yeah.
yeah. Well, I think I think I want to unpack that a little bit more because in my experience, I've gone through multiple moments where I've lost myself and lost my identity and completely. If you were to ask me like, "Are you being yourself?" It would have been a very difficult question for me to answer because on the one hand, I would have said no, but on the other hand, it would have been very hard to say like, I can change or I'm capable of doing something else. And so, like for context, when I had both of my kids, I was still in graduate school and I did not take maternity leave or anything of that nature. And so I was dealing with full time graduate school, two babies, postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, the stress of life, household responsibilities. And then I also had a little side business going at the same time. And I was in a state like exactly what you've talked about of like I knew I needed to transform, but I was constantly burnt out, fatigued, exhausted. I was having like 5 cups of coffee a day. Um, like all the signs were there. And so if you were to ask me that, I would have been like, this isn't who I am, but also this is who I am because my reality is so intense that I have no way of changing it. And it's a question that I sat with for many, many months, and it drove me crazy because in my soul I knew something has to change. But the concept of like there was no even excess energy to dedicate towards change.
Mm.
I was in like survival, trying to keep up with 72 poop diapers and a dissertation paper to write and all the above.
That is a lot going on. And look, I'm like, firstly, a lot of compassion for that. And I really, and I think when people are in that situation, like, they might know that something needs to change, but that might not be the time for change. If you can't get your head above water and
Yeah.
you're just firefighting, be reassured that it will pass, right? Um, and I'm there with you. I've been sleep deprived with kids, and it's not a great look on anybody. So, um, like, and I say this to people who come to me, and they're like, "Well, I've got this, and this going on." It's like, great, okay. You realise you're never going to be busier
Yeah.
than you are right now. I was saying that to a client last week. Actually, I was like, "You're never going to be this busy. Two young kids, lots of other stuff going on." Um, and that not might not be the right time for change. It's difficult to get clarity in chaos, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the chaos just needs to dissipate a little bit before we make change.
Yeah, I agree with that. For me personally, it was being intentional around finding even an hour to go work out that I can be on my own, that I can get my head above the water. And it was always in those moments where I was like, okay, I know this is my time to rest and recharge, but also to like push my body and get exercise. But it took a lot of work. And just to reiterate for anyone listening, like if you are in it and you are in the chaos, and it is so incredibly overwhelming. Like I had more times than I can count where I was at the gym working out and I would sit down and I would just be like half falling asleep from the sleep deprivation and then half fighting back tears from like the exhaustion and the stress. And then and just like getting up and continuing because exercise is important to me. It was such a chaotic place to be in, but it's those small intentional moments where it's like I know I need to change and I'm living in the chaos and I've been living in chaos and I'm going to anticipate living in chaos and no one is going to take that chaos away from me. And like yes, it will pass and yes, the kids get older and yes, the chaos changes, but I'd say if you can small moments of clarity, they go such a long way. And then if you add in those glimmers of like, look, I worked out, I calmed down, and then I was more patient with my kids, even if it was just for half an hour. Like, and then you start to build momentum in that way.
Definitely. And also like redefining goals. Like
Mm.
if I think back to, when I was a young dad, like a good goal is just to get your kids to sleep through the night, right? So you can get a good night's sleep, and that's enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I think maybe you can unpack that a little bit more because, like, I identify as a high achiever. So when you say redefine goals, yes, but I have initial resistance because it's like, well, I can do it, I can achieve it.
It's a great question for me because I'm very much an A-type personality. So this has come with age and experience, I say it. But I mean, look at it this way: like what you described to me is very common in that we take so much on in terms of, the hustle, obviously, to make a living, to make money, to be available for your children, for your partner, and in the Western world, we can become quite isolated. So often, just recognizing the fact that it's a tough gig, right? And through that recognition, then redefining what your goals are, because most of us in the Western world don't live in families where we can pass a baby off to an aunt or a grandma, or another family member. So it does become really difficult. Um, so yeah, look, I think to your question, right? You're a high achiever. High achievers like data. I would, you can treat those sleep throughs like runs. Okay, I'm just going to tick these off. Right, I'm on a streak now.
Yeah.
Um, I should say getting kids to sleep through the night is a stretch goal, right? So that might be unrealistic as well.
Very true. That's very true. Um, no, it's good. I think redefining expectations, redefining goals is hard, but it adds to that mental clarity and that mental freedom. Um, Yeah, I'll leave that there. So I love talking about the concept of resistance. And I think many people experience resistance without knowing what it is. So, from your experience, what signs of resistance do you tend to see? And when does it tend to come up the most for people?
Do you mean resistance to change?
Resistance to change, resistance to the transformation, yeah, resistance to the process.
It's a good question. Look, some people are resistant, right? Some people want to go out and buy a car. That's fine. That's okay. Like what I do is not going to be for everybody, and that's absolutely fine. Or it might just not be the right time.
Mm.
We're all on different journeys at different levels of, pace and acceleration, and when the right time to grow and evolve is very very individual to a person. If you think about, some like CEOs who are like early 20s, and you think, wow, you've got an old head on young shoulders, right? And then, you know, you see people that are kind of, still making the way up in the 40s and 50s, and that's fine. So resistance, I think, is often linked to the belief that something will work, right?
Mm.
So a lot of the work that I do, and we're going into the realm of esoteric again, is I do breath work. I'm a breath work teacher as well as a performance coach. Like breath work is a buzz phrase, but it's not new. It's been going for centuries, right? And there's a lot of ancient techniques and wisdom which is out there, which has been branded new or woo woo that
Mhm.
people don't resonate with. So part of my mission and my work, as just like what I consider to be a fairly regular guy who's a runner, a dad, a husband, is to make that more accessible for the masses, because a lot of the techniques and systems which are available in terms of accessing joy and wellness are just hugely powerful. but not enough people are using them.
Yeah.
So hopefully that would help with resistance. That's part of the mission.
Yeah, I love that. I think I've caught myself many times looking at the simple techniques and doubting them because of their simplicity and just saying to myself, like, there's no way it can be that simple. There's no way just that, like, a regular breathwork routine can be that effective at regulating my nervous system. And it's probably resistance that comes up for that for myself as well. But it's almost like this seems so hard and this seems so complicated that a simple solution seems too simple to work, if that makes sense. But to your point, it's like I am one of those people that has gone down all the rabbit holes, has tried all the things, all the techniques, and like breathwork is amazing. Like breathwork has changed my life. And it is one of those things where I still have those days where I'm like, how? Like it's so simple. Why is it not like a 7-step transformation routine that takes 3 hours a day that eliminates all limiting beliefs at once? But it's just good old breathing, right?
So,
Um, yeah.
yeah, and look, there's lots of, I guess, what we consider simple techniques that I employ. I think part of the resistance is that a lot of the results are intangible,
Mm,
right? So if I tell you, okay, you're going to get more clarity, more energy, so okay, well, great, but how do I measure that, right? Now, if I tell you you're going to be 300% more effective at work, you're like, oh yeah, that's great. Now you will be with more clarity and energy, but
yeah.
some of the results are intangible. So if you think about very simple wellness techniques, right? So let's talk about like limiting blue light from your
Mm,
phone screen, and a very rule of thumb is like don't switch on your phone when you wake up. Don't even have your phone in your bedroom, right? You can still buy alarm clocks. That's possible.
yeah.
We've got watches, right? It's okay. You don't need your phone in your bedroom, and you don't need it on. And this is something that I started doing quite a few years ago. You don't switch your phone on for an hour. And weirdly, when you do switch your phone on, the world is still spinning without you having checked your messages. And likewise, in the evening, of course, have at least an hour before you go to bed where you don't have your phone on. Now, that's really simple, but is really effective in terms of sleep. And people will say, well, I still got my 8 hours. Yes, but how deep was your sleep? How restorative was it? What was the quality of your sleep? So that's like a really simple action that we can all take. Another one is, my family came back from overseas the other day, and the first thing we do is we just ground, just get on bare feet and stand on the grass.
Nice.
Um, some people lie on the grass and start doing like, well, there wouldn't be snow angels; it'd be like grass angels and start,
Mm,
waving your arms all over the place. But again, it's really it's so impactful because you're just reconnecting with something that is there, nature, to get
yeah.
grounded.
I love that. It's funny. One of the pieces of advice I give clients often, for anyone experiencing anxiety before speaking, like before a meeting, before a presentation, I tell them to physically shake it out. So to like stand up and shake their body. And the first time I tell that to them, they're always like, "You're kind of crazy. Like this is insane. I'm not doing this before my Zoom call." And then they'll try it, and it works. And it's so simple but so effective. So I love that. And to your point about phones, it's actually an experiment I've been doing this week. I was someone who was notoriously, as soon as I wake up, like, what did I miss? What happened? What do I need to know? And I found that simply delaying that, even if it's for 20 minutes, made a massive difference in how I feel starting my day and how I react to my kids. So sometimes they wake up. So my son's 3. Sometimes he'll wake up and he's just crying and whining, and, like, that's
Mm.
how he starts his day. And if I've started my day by scrolling on my phone and, like, "Oh, I didn't get this email that I was waiting for," "Oh, I didn't get this," or, whatever, and I'm already priming myself to be in a negative state, reacting to the whining ends up being more negative or more different or not as kind as I would like, versus if I make the simple switch of not looking at my phone, I have more patience and more empathy and more just, like, time to commit to that. And so it's these small, simple things that make all the difference. And we all need those reminders to do them. And so, backing up a bit, I really liked how you said everyone's at a different stage, everyone's on a different path, everyone's on a different part of their journey. And not everyone is ready for the transformation, even if they need to be. Not everyone is ready to actually commit to it. So, from your experience, what tends to happen, or like, what are the ways that your clients feel when they are ready to take that next step?
Okay, yeah. So we when the way that they feel is that they're just ready to try something to change,
Nice.
right? And there might be a bit, you know, fearful about it. That's my job, right? Which is really to guide them, to hold space, to ask the right questions, to be by their side. And actually, what I do with my clients is we have a 3 month program with like 6 sessions throughout those 3 months. But they have unlimited access, WhatsApp, Telegram, like voice notes, messages to me. I think that's quite important because
Mm.
you don't want to have to set up a session if you've got a 2 or 5 minute question.
Yeah.
And it often leads to a much better result when we're just side
Mhm.
by side, like communicating and interacting. But what will happen is the first 1 or 2 sessions will typically go into the past and we'll unpick that. And you can physically see the energy change after those 2 sessions. They'll just turn up, they're lighter, they're brighter, they're smiling more. They'll say something like, "Oh, my wife's noticed a difference," or, "Work colleagues are wondering what's happened." And I'm like, okay,
Mm.
well, it's good, it's happening. It's
Yeah.
intangible, but it's happening.
Yeah, I love that. It's wholeheartedly agree. I like to say that for many of us carrying all these beliefs and this baggage and this past experience, sometimes the simple fact of sitting down and putting a name to it and putting an event to it takes it from being this big, ambiguous, dark cloud weighing over you to just like dissipating and giving you freedom. And then all of a sudden, I'm not just an angry person who tends to be hot headed and blow up. Oh, like all of a sudden, I understand where this is coming from. And it's a behavior that I've learned, and I'm not destined to be this way forever. And it's like, it's again, it's the simple thing of having these conversations and identifying those moments and those events that lead to profound ripple effects within someone's life. And like, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's so great. And look, to your point, another function of working with somebody is is to become more objective about how you operate and those feelings and be able to look at them in a way that's slightly outside of yourself,
Mm,
and to have somebody there with you who is providing a level of accountability and support um, is really impactful. I still work with people
yeah.
for that reason, and it's always an honor to hold space for others.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think at the very least, an exercise that I try for myself is I'll talk to myself in third person. So it's not just me, it's me, myself, and I. And I have this like external persona that I use to guide me and talk to me and like analyze things. And it sounds really weird to say it out loud that way, but it works because it lets you see things from a different perspective. So it's
Mm,
like as if you were talking to a coach, coaching yourself. It was just like a fun little exercise for people to try. So when you're working with clients and they're committed, they're ready, they're going from midlife crisis to midlife transformation, and they're excited, and then they start, and it's hard, and breaking habits is hard, and the people in their life may still be treating them like the old version of them rather than the new one that they're trying to become, and things at work are still stressful, and so they're sort of facing all these external challenges that conflict with who they're trying to become. What advice would you have for someone who's in that situation?
so the other things that we do is we provide frameworks around, like, we'll make the individual understand how they communicate better. So
Mm,
again, they're being objective about how they communicate. Like, did I get that right? Did I get that wrong? We also decode decision making. So
yeah.
they're just becoming more congruent with who they are at their core. And you raise a very interesting point, because when we undergo a transformation and we turn up and we meet the same people in work or the same people at home, they're expecting us to get triggered in the same way as before,
Mhm.
right? But that doesn't happen. Now, where a person has elevated themselves typically, and this is the ripple effect, they'll elevate others just by the quality of their interaction, their communication, their words, their
Mm,
energy, right? And that will happen over time. So there will sometimes be, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back,
Yeah.
without a doubt. And that's where we learn, and that's where we double down on getting the muscle memory to get it right. Um, but yeah, I think just it's a work in progress just to get that locked down. Like, once you clear limiting influences and beliefs, you're building new neural pathways in your brain.
Yeah.
So then and another thing that can happen is you will become much more aware
Mm.
of everything around you. So you can kind of, in terms of like the hero's journey, we're in the belly of the whale. Like, oh, okay, the world feels a bit different now, and
Mm.
there's a lot more stuff to discover. And you're kind of finding your way again in a really nice, cool way. But again, it's a different level. I'm going to use this word. We're going esoteric again. A different level of consciousness.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that. I think two things come to mind for me. The first is I've experienced this and I see this with some of the clients I work with. To your point, it's either they're elevating people, and I agree with that, or sometimes I see they're first triggering people by them becoming better. And there's something about us, increasing our frequency, increasing our consciousness, becoming better versions of ourselves, that just seems to piss other people off. And sometimes it results in them trying to re-trigger us, or like there's just often this sort of like area that comes up.
Yeah,
But if you can push through that, if you can remain in your transformation, it's almost like a test. Like I love when people talk, the universe
100%.
is testing
Yeah,
you and stuff, right? But if you can push through that, they will get elevated too, which is a nice additional ripple effect. And
well,
then, yeah,
I think that's so true. I think people sometimes with narcissistic tendencies will do that because they've got a rise out of you before because they're playing on your emotional triggers.
yeah,
Once you rid yourself of those emotional triggers, they're holding up a mirror to themselves, which is why it can be painful. But ultimately, to your point, I think they will elevate.
yeah. And I think one of my favorite things to see is so much of this work shifts how you think about yourself and how you show up and like what your identity is at a fundamental level. And for me, and I'd love to hear your experience as well, it's always really cool to start working with someone. And then a few months down the road, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, I never did this. And it's like, no, no, you did. But you've changed so much that you don't even remember how you used to show up and how you used to think and what used to like cause fear and triggers. And now you're this whole other person that just like, what was that? Like, what are you talking about? It's great.
I think that's very true, and I guess part of this work is around ending up living lightly, right?
Mm,
That's what we want to do: live with some lightness in our hearts. Um, and again, a lot of this work is around making sure that the nervous system is in good shape, right?
yeah.
That we are maximizing our energetic capacity. Like the word overwhelm or burnout is
Mm,
really applicable to just where when you're out of energy, when you're overloaded. And the work that we do is the opposite of that.
yeah.
You might not even be burnt out or overloaded when you do the work, but you're just wanting to increase capacity to bring more things in, actually, to bring in new friendships, relationships, work experiences. It typically all comes once you kind of open yourself up to it. And I think a lot of people underestimate what is possible in that respect.
I'd agree. I think I want to go down the rabbit hole of nervous system regulation a little bit deeper because it's something that is not nearly talked about enough, but it's something that is so incredibly crucial. And so, going back to my own experience, when I was in the midst of my first, I guess, midlife crisis, I'll call it, of my two kids, my grad school, my complete chaos of 5 coffees a day, my nervous system was so incredibly dysregulated. I had adrenal fatigue, chronic stress, all the above. And um, I started having panic attacks on a regular basis, which is not something I had ever experienced in my life. Like I had never accumulated that much stress. Not only was I having panic attacks on a regular basis, but I was having, I don't even know what to call it besides like panic attacks in my sleep, where like if I was asleep and there was a noise, like if my daughter opened the door, if someone like just dropped something, I would wake up in like having a panic attack. And it was the most dysregulating thing I've ever experienced because it was like it's it's um it's so hard to control, like if that makes sense, because you're having a physical reaction.
Yeah.
And like it's just a very difficult time in my life, and that's how I came to find nervous system regulation. And if nothing else in my life changed, if everything stayed the same, but I had taken the time to do something like breath work or some sort of nervous system regulation that day, it made a tremendous difference in how I felt, how I reacted, how things, went on.
Mm,
And I honestly wanna say that a lot of my, like, healing and health and recovery was due to nervous system regulation. But
mm, mm.
no one talks about, like, when you go to the family doctor, like, no one's here, like, "How's your nervous system? Like, how often are you regulating it?" It's just like, "Oh, you're
Yeah.
stressed." Like, I went for a checkup yesterday, and my doctor's like, "Oh, you're stressed? Okay, take it easy." What does that mean? Like, that's not tangible. That doesn't help me, right? So as someone who helps people with that so much deeper, I'd love for you to just unpack it a little bit more.
Yeah, totally. And look, I think that the point that you make around, going to the doctor who might just say you're stressed is interesting, right? Because there are miracles of modern medicine.
Yeah.
But if you look at a lot of I just ran the London Marathon for a charity called Yes to Life, and they're a cancer charity, and they talk about integrative medicine,
Mm,
about just thinking about things, your plan holistically, not outsourcing it, but staying in control in it, having a number of different components, and that's where we can lean in to that ancient wisdom, to those techniques. So what you described in terms of the midlife crisis sounded like a constant state of fear, like hypervigilance,
yeah.
if you like, right? Where you're kind of constantly on edge. And I think that the way that modern society is set up in the West is that we can default to that relatively easily, right? If you lent into your notifications, if you're having too much coffee, if you're stuck in traffic all day, if there was a million other things going on, school pickups and drops, like, it's quite easy to get to that point, right? But then to your question, like, how do you unpick it? How do you get out of it? Um, the first stage, of course, is diagnosis, right? So you would know, being a centered grounded person, that if you're getting waking up bolt upright, if your daughter comes into the room, then something's not right. Some really simple things, right? If you're reaching for your phone too much,
Mm,
that's an issue. We do that when we're tired and when we're out of kilter. We start picking up the phone and like doom scrolling, right? Um, Too much caffeine, which you've mentioned, that's definitely one. I think using alcohol in the wrong way, um, or letting alcohol use you, should I say, right? So they're three really simple things that you can pick up on in terms of, okay, how is my nervous system regulation? Because the more you use your phone, the more caffeine you drink, and the more alcohol you drink, that doesn't make it any better. Right? That makes it a lot worse. So that can be like a really simple diagnostic. And then how do you then free yourself of that like stuck nervous energy? Lots of ways to do it. I think it depends on the individual, right? It could be, do you live near nature? Can you spend like 20 minutes in nature in a day? Might be difficult with young kids. Can you even just get out into the garden? Can you see a sunrise? Um, can you put your feet on the earth? Can you drink more water? Can you even just spend 10 minutes in silence? It's difficult with young kids. I just keep thinking none of this is possible with little kids. But can you, can you journal? There are so many different things that work for people depending on personality type. Breath work is really powerful, I find. The type of breath work I do is conscious connected breath work, which is like circular breathing, and you'll do a particular technique for 20, 25 minutes, and then you'll have a rest period of 20, 25 minutes, and it like detoxes anything that's in your nervous system. And the great thing about it is that we're not using our conscious brain to decide what's being detoxed. Whatever subconsciously comes up
yeah.
comes out. So that's
Yeah, I love that. One of the first major somatic release breathwork ceremonies I did, it was like, I want to say like 45 minutes of like intense breathing. And I had stuff coming up from when I was like 12, 14, 16, and like mind you, I'm in my 30s now. So I was like, still, I'm still holding on to this. Yes, okay. But backing up a little bit, I think something that I'd like to add that I have noticed for myself and I like to recommend to people when I can is I have started to categorize um, nervous system regulation into two kind of areas. One is sort of like what you mentioned when you are, I like to say it's like when you're exhausted and you have nothing left. That's one for me. I will go to like the journaling, the calmer breath work, the grounding, nature. And then there's the other camp, which is what I also experience when it's like I have too much. It's the equivalent of like if you're someone who's ever experienced coffee jitters, like that's the feeling, right? Like I have too much. Sitting down to meditate or to journal will not work because it'll just be like this is too slow. It's like there's a
Yeah,
mismatch of energies, right? So in those cases, I love recommending intense activity, either running, stairs, speed walking, shaking, dancing, anything of that nature that is physically getting the energy out. And if anyone is really into the esoteric side of things, think about the things that are bothering you, that are stressing you out while you're doing the intense physical activity. And it just like helps eliminate it. So, like for me, I'm a runner as well. And I used to do, my dad used to train me. My dad's he runs like 15K every day. Like it's insane. Kudos to him. But he used to train me to be a long distance runner as well as like a track
mm,
runner to do like short distance sprints. And so we would have training sessions where we would do like a 10K together. And then we'd end it by doing like 15 sprints back and forth on the track, which was great. It was intense. It was a lot as a kid. But it taught me that like now, if I'm in that state of I have too much stress and anxiety and I'd like to release it, and I know that calm meditation is too slow, I'll go and I'll do some sprints and I'll think about what's stressing me out. And like magic, it's just not it's just not stressful anymore by the end of it. It's amazing.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. As many people say, and I agree with you, never regret a run.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true. That's true.
Um, and I think you're completely right. It depends on the type of person that you are. If you're, and the type of stress that you have. If you're constantly switched on, you need to slow down. If you feel stuck, then you might need to speed up. Right? It's
Yeah.
the proverbial, okay, something's gone wrong at work, so I need to get out on the punch bag.
Mm.
Right? That can actually really help with somatic release. That's
Yeah.
a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Awesome. Okay. Well, from your experience, I guess I'd love to hear more about when someone is undergoing a transformation, when they're becoming this lighter, more joyful version of themselves. What are some of the things that become possible, or what are some of the I don't want to call them side effects, but what are some of the ripple effects that they start to see that maybe they didn't think were possible beforehand?
They will interest. So I like using this word. They'll become more ruthless.
Ooh, nice.
Ruthless with their time,
Yep.
with their decisions, with who they spend time with,
Mhm.
and that will have a compounding effect because they're typically taking the shoulds out of life. I should do that. I should meet that person. They don't like me up, but I should. No, not anymore. Life's too short. So that does happen. And I think that's a positive. What else happens? They typically, become better with time, more connected, more present with family, with friends, better communicators. Again, that creates a muscle memory to be more joyful and more playful. And, in terms of career and work, once we take off a little bit of the conditioning, they'll realize, okay, a lot is possible here. A lot of people come to me in their 40s and like, I'm too old to start something new. I'm like, you've still got 25 to 30 years, possibly longer. We're living longer than ever.
Yep.
You've got you're not even halfway through your career. There's so much you can do, and there are so many opportunities these days. So that can be a real eye opener. Just thinking about how they can manifest a better future, which aligns more with their passion and purpose.
I love that. I think if I was to add anything to that, I'd add if you're listening and you're in that boat where you're like, what's the point? I'm too late, or I've committed to all these things. I'm going to challenge you to think about your ability to have long-term vision, right? So for many people, I see there's this, I don't want to say inability, but a lack of training on how to actually think long term and think long term realistically and think about the
Yeah.
implications and consequences of something. And if that's hard for you, then maybe that's why there's some resistance to the idea of change. When in reality, if you're already miserable, if you're already unhappy, miserable is kind of a strong word, but if you're already not liking the way that things are going, you're not going to like them for the next 20 years, even for the next 5 years. And instead, 5 years from now, you might find yourself in the exact same position. Like, I want to change, but, and arguably that's so much worse than just trying it and doing the thing that you want to do that you know you're going to want to do anyway. So I'll leave it
Exactly.
there.
That's powerful. And look, I spent over 20 years in the corporate world, and when I was leaving the corporate world to set up my own business, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, like, are you sure you want to leave? You want to do that?" And my reflection on that now is, and it is that a lot of people have so much of that identity wrapped up in their work, in their title, in the organization, and that's good, right? Because it means that they're driven, they've got purpose. But when you think about when you get to the end of that arc of life and you look back, like what do you want your legacy to be? So when I was doing my breathwork teacher training, this might sound morbid, but all of us as an exercise wrote our eulogies and then read them out to the class. It was a very emotional experience, actually. And if you think about that and what you actually want to achieve in your life, I don't think anybody's really going to mention their job title in a eulogy. They're going to talk about their impact, the people they worked with, the connections they made, um, you know, what they did in the world, right? So, yeah, when people lean into that, it can be really powerful.
I agree. I've done a similar exercise. It does sound morbid, but it is quite a good wake up call to, even if it's just to be like, wow, I'm playing way smaller than I think I should be. And if I do think I'm running out of time, well, then I better get to it because I'm not doing anything close to the type of legacy that I'd like to leave. So it's a good exercise to try.
Yeah.
So if someone's at that crossroads moment right now, what's one thing that they could reflect on or ask themselves to sort of, I guess, give themselves that extra push to go down the road of reinvention and transformation?
You can ask themselves one question, which is, what's the kindest thing I can do for myself and my family?
It's a good question. And the answer
And
is
that,
transformation.
yeah, call me.
I love that. Okay. Any final thoughts, takeaways, advice that you'd like to leave the listeners with?
The great thing about this work is that when you work with people and you take them through a program, similar to the work that you do with people, they get to the point where they'll then go and spread that work with other people. They'll raise others, they'll elevate others. We were again here, but you're raising the vibration of the planet ultimately, right? And that's a great thing because there's enough bad things happening. So yeah, it's great. Look, it's an honor to do this work. So I love it.
Yeah, I love that. Great way to end it. Now, where can people go to connect with you and to find out more about your work?
They can find me on LinkedIn, Ramon Ghosh, which is just put it in and I'll come up. And there's a website as well. The firm that I run is Grand Rising Coaching. It's www.risinggrand.com, and you can get in touch with me that way.
Amazing.